And we've not exploited our own supply enough to help bring down price and to help consumers out there everywhere. And so that's all this does, and I commend gentlemen for bringing it forward. I urge support for it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yes. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank my friend Mr. Markey. This is about big oil handouts, pure and simple. There are no lessons learned, no lessons applied with regard to safety or protection of the environment. You know, if these companies were energy companies, as they like to say, they would invest more in producing sustainable, clean energy, alternatives. In the long run, we all know it. We've got to face the facts. We've got to break our addiction to oil. And if the majority, the authors of this legislation, really wanted to help the motorist, the consumer, they would address speculation. They would end the speculation. They would end the tax giveaways. They would use the strategic oil reserve to short-circuit speculation. The oil companies are not energy companies. They are fleecing machines. The greatest profits of any corporation in history. And you heard me say a few minutes ago that the biggest of them, Exxon, had an effective tax rate of about 0.4%. This will not help the consumer.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, can I inquire if my friend from Massachusetts is prepared to close? If he is
I am prepared to close.
Hold on there just for a second there. I have one gentleman that does want to speak, and so we'll allow that to happen. So I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Landry.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ran down here to thank my colleagues in this chairman for finally doing what the American people have been asking them to do, and to start the process of stopping to kick the energy problem can in this country down the road. Finally, we're going to take the steps necessary to put people back to work and to start America down a path of affordable domestic energy. Now, they say that we're robbing Grandma and Grandpa. Grandma and Grandpa hold stock in those energy companies. Down in Louisiana, Grandma and Grandpa's grandsons and grandchildren work in an industry that provides that energy. Right now, they don't have a job. They're being laid off, or they're being sent to Brazil or Africa or the Middle East to drill for oil out there. While we have spent over $1 trillion of taxpayer money funding the Department of Energy to wean us off of foreign oil. I just rise to say thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to my colleagues who have come today in support of this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
I would defer to the chairman of the committee. If he is the concluding speaker on his side, I am prepared to close on our side.
I would advise my friend, this time I am the concluding speaker, so I'll reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
And would the chairman please...
2.5 minutes.
I thank you. I yield myself the remaining time.
Gentleman's recognized.
So here's where we are. The Republicans take over. The Republicans say they're ready to put together a plan for our country. It's 1 year after the BP catastrophe in the Gulf of Mexico, the worst environmental disaster in our nation's history. Last year, the Republicans blocked passage of any safety legislation that would learn the lessons of what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. The BP Spill Commission has come back. They now say that fatalities on U.S. rigs are 4 times higher than those on European rigs. We should be #1 in drilling, and we should be #1 in safety, the Republicans refuse to deal with the endemic, systemic problems with safety that were identified in the American oil industry. The oil industry is now garnering the largest profits any corporations in the world have ever been able to enjoy. But the Republicans refuse to bring out here legislation which will take away their tax breaks. They don't need to have tax breaks to do something they're doing anyway. It's like subsidizing a fish to swim or a bird to fly. We don't have to give them taxpayers' money. The Ryan budget slashes benefits for grandma and grandpa, then takes that money and gives it away in tax breaks to millionaires and to the oil industry. Do we really need to tell grandma we're cutting back on her medical benefit and then taking that money and giving it in oil breaks to the biggest companies in our country? They don't need tax breaks. And finally, what we should be talking about is the deployment of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was used by both President Bushes. It was used by President Clinton. It does work. The New York Mercantile Exchange is where oil futures are traded. It is a casino of crude oil right now. On one day, back just 2 months ago, 45% of all of the computer-generated trades were in the oil industry. It was twice the value of all of the oil in the world. That's what we need to do, to deal with those speculators. And the way to do it is what we've done in the past: deploy the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, deploy it now, send the fear of losing fortunes into the hearts of those speculators, and you'll see the price of oil drop like a rock. That's what we need to do. That's what the consumers need as they're heading into the Memorial Day weekend. That's what people all across our country are wondering what is going to happen to our economy. 10 of the last 11 recessions in our country are tied to the rise in the price of oil. 10 of the last 11 recessions, ladies and gentlemen. What we saw in 1990 was President Bush won the war in Iraq in 90 and 91, but because he never deployed the Strategic Petroleum Reserve until it was too late, a mini recession went through our economy and President Clinton was able to defeat him. Let's learn this lesson of the link between the rise in price of oil and recessions that are created in our economy. Deploy the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Ignore this agenda of the Republican Party.
Time of the gentleman's expired. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, how much time?
7 minutes.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this has been a very interesting debate, and there's been a lot of rhetoric thrown around, some which doesn't even apply whatsoever in any remoteness to the bill that's before us today. H.R. 1230, which we are debating today, simply tells this administration that they should go through with the lease sales that were already authorized by a previous administration. In other words, all of these lease sales had gone through whatever process they had to go through. 3 of them were in the Gulf of Mexico, 1 of them was off the coast of Virginia. And we are simply saying with this legislation is let's send a signal to the international markets that America is serious about becoming less dependent on foreign oil, and we do that by saying this administration should go through with these lease sales, which I might add, Mr. Chairman, we've heard about loss of revenue from the other side of the aisle. These lease sales themselves would provide the general fund with $40 million over the next 10 years. So this is what we're doing, which is really kind of ironic. We're telling this administration to do something it should be doing by law anyway. That's what this scope is. So I urge my colleagues to vote on this bill. We can have other discussion on the other bills in the ensuing days. As far as the discussion talking about big oil, I don't know how many, I could probably count the number of colleagues on the other side of the aisle that didn't say something about big oil rather than those that did. But what is interesting, you would be led to believe that the only big oil in the world apparently are American companies. I would suggest that is entirely not true. In fact, when you talk about big oil, Mr. Chairman, really who you should be focusing on is OPEC. Because crude oil is an international product, or is a global product. There's no question about that. And yet OPEC controls 45% of the market. It is a cartel, Mr. Chairman. There is no question about that. And we all know, simple economics, if there's a cartel on any commodity, the way that you break the cartel is by increasing the supply. And that's what these combination of these three bills do, is simply send a signal to the markets, and I've said this over and over, that we are serious about utilizing the resources we have. Now it's been said, several of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle said, well, the United States doesn't have any resources. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Because if you look at government data on what the potential resources are in the Outer Continental Shelf, and I'm going to say onshore because it's all American potential resources, the potential resources of oil equivalent per barrel is in excess, when you combine OCS and onshore, the potential resources are in excess of 2 trillion barrels of oil. That far exceeds what one of my colleagues earlier, Dr. Fleming from Louisiana, said. It far exceeds what they have in Saudi Arabia, in fact, in other OPEC nations. Now, this rhetoric about trying to blame somebody when the issue is really something as basic as having a supply out there that consumers can utilize. What we are saying here is twofold. Actually, it's threefold. One of them relates directly to American jobs. Energy sector jobs are good-paying jobs. So let's encourage the energy sector in this country to expand so we can have those good-paying jobs. That's good to get the funk out of our economy. Secondly, we become less dependent on foreign sources because energy is an important part of our growing economy. And if we have a stable source of that in the future, our economy can grow with the surety we'll have a stable source of energy. But probably more important long term, Mr. Chairman, the reason why we should pass these bills to send a signal to the market is a national security issue. We all know that, in fact, I mentioned OPEC. There are some countries in OPEC that are outwardly hostile to the United States. One of them is in South America, Venezuela. Why are we relying on them for the supply of our energy when we have these resources that I just pointed out to you in excess of 2 trillion equivalent barrels of oil? So, Mr. Chairman, this is the first step. This is the first step of starting the process of becoming less dependent on on foreign oil and on foreign energy, I should say, and it is the first step to get our economy recovering by creating good American jobs. And with that, I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 1230, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time for general debate is expired. Pursuant to the rule, a bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered read. No amendment to the bill is in order except those printed in Part B of House Report 112-73. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by a proponent and an opponent of the amendment, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 112-73. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-73, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
Pursuant to House Resolution 245, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
I thank the Chair. The authors of this bill are so eager to accelerate the giveaways to big oil rather than to protect the consumers, the environment, and workers, that they, in their legislation, deem that the shoddy environmental analysis conducted 4 years ago, in other words, years prior to the Gulf oil blowout, to be sufficient for all future lease sales in the Gulf, despite their glaring deficiencies. They deem, in other words, assume, declare that this is sufficient. Look, this environmental impact statement was not adequate then, and we know it's not adequate now. Deem is a dangerous word in legislation, especially legislation that could jeopardize worker safety and imperil the economic structure of coastal communities. My amendment would strike the language deeming the pre-spill environmental work to be sufficient, and it therefore would require a new, updated analysis. And the administration says they intend to and are prepared to apply a strengthened environmental analysis incorporating the lessons learned. This amnesia bill before us learns no lessons from the worst environmental oil spill in our history. Just look at some of the conclusions contained in the outdated environmental analysis. The EIS determined, quote, the most likely size of an offshore spill greater than or equal to 1,000 barrels would be 4,600 barrels. So that, in other words, the pre-BP spill analysis concluded that the most likely size of the largest spill that we would see in the Gulf of Mexico would be 4,600 barrels of oil. The Deepwater Horizon produced 4 million barrels spilling into the Gulf. In addition, the analysis concluded that the total volume of oil that would be spilled from all spills over 40 years would be roughly 47,000 barrels of oil. That's less than what spilled from the Deepwater Horizon in one day. The EIS concluded that in the worst-case scenario, something like several dozen miles of Gulf coastline would be affected by the spill. In reality, it affected 950 miles of coastline across all the Gulf states. The earlier EIS review that they would say should apply for all future drilling determined that a deepwater blowout would not present a cleanup problem because the oil would rise in a water column surfacing almost directly above, that's their words in the EIS that they would deem to apply, surfacing almost directly over the source location. In fact, we know the oil spewing spread in subsurface plumes for miles and miles and miles across the Gulf. For commercial fisheries, the environmental statement said, quote, a subsurface blowout would have a negligible effect on the Gulf of Mexico fish resources or commercial fishing, end quote. In reality, the BP spill closed 88,000 square miles of the Gulf to fishing. These are just a few examples of how this is an inadequate environmental statement. Have we learned nothing from the largest oil spill in Gulf waters? It is so thoughtless and so boilerplate that it talks about protecting walruses in the Gulf of Mexico. This was a thoughtless environmental impact statement, surely not worthy of the people who live along the coast. This environmental impact statement is surely not worthy of those who make their living either in the oil business or the fishing business or any other business. The fact is, we have far more information now than we did in 2007, and after immense cost, really hard-earned knowledge, we certainly should not proceed as if nothing has happened without reassessing our assumptions and our analysis. The Department of the Interior is working to hold lease sales mandated by this bill, but in a reasonable time frame. Any leases should reflect the lessons learned from the BP spill. In other words, it should reflect reality, not some dream world. They live in a dream world economically, they live in a dream world environmentally. It is clearly a world where walruses live in the Gulf of Mexico. My amendment, I think, is a reasonable way to proceed. It would require that we do new environmental work that builds on the hard-earned lessons that we learned from the largest oil spill in the Gulf waters. It ensures that future leasing in the Gulf fully considers the environmental impact of drilling. I urge adoption of the amendment.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I strongly oppose this amendment. The EIS work conducted thus far for the lease sales, and keep in mind these lease sales were already okayed, is complete, thorough, and sufficient to safely and responsibly conduct these lease sales. It is important to note that this is only one of many environmental analyses that these leases will undergo before any drilling can start. At each of multiple stages, additional detailed environmental safety and reviews will be conducted. The language in this bill, underlying bill, allows the administration to move forward with these lease sales in a timely manner, but does not allow drilling until at least several more layers of thorough environmental assessments and reviews are conducted on each lease sale sold at these sales. I think that's what the gentleman was getting to. The underlying bill allows that to happen. These additional environmental studies will allow for the latest and best available information following the oil spill to be concluded in studies and applied to any drilling that will take place. In totality, the library of environmental reviews will end up totaling tens of thousands of pages, Mr. Chairman, and hundreds of hours by environmental scientists, engineers, biologists, and other professionals. But this amendment isn't about environmental protection. This amendment is about removing the timelines in this bill to conduct these 4 lease sales. Keep in mind, these lease sales are already agreed to by a prior administration. The real effect of this amendment is to allow President Obama to block increased energy production by continuing to push these lease sales off past 2012 or 2017 in some cases. The real impact of this amendment is that we are right back where we started when the President canceled these lease sales, sending jobs and energy production overseas. This administration's actions to delay these lease sales and their long record of energy roadblocks is why 2011, this year, may be the first year since 1958 that no lease sales will occur in the OCS. It is for this reason that OCS revenues in 2011 will fall by more than $9 billion compared to 2008. By validating the existing EIS work, the bill ensures that these lease sales will move forward this year, generating revenue for taxpayers, ensuring that our leasing program continues in a timely manner, while also allowing for additional safety measures to be taken. I urge my colleagues to vote on this amendment, and I reserve my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington.
How much time do I have?
The gentleman from Washington has 2.5 minutes remaining.
I'd be more than happy to yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Louisiana.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here we go again. Delay, delay, delay. The poor people of my district will have to sit there unemployed and wait again. We've gotten environmental study after environmental study after environmental study that will happen after these lease sales. This does not prevent the additional environmental studies that will take place anyhow. All it will do will force those companies to take up to 3 more years before we can get to our business of drilling, so we can get to our business of providing for the American people affordable energy. Again, it's a delay tactic. How do I know that? Because I can tell you that this administration pulls delay tactic after delay tactic after delay tactic in permitting wells in the Gulf of Mexico. They lift a moratorium and then they don't issue permits. So what do they do now? The other side of the aisle, my colleagues on the other side, they say, well, it looks like we have a piece of legislation in front of us that's going to finally start to open the Gulf back up. So let's see how many roadblocks we can put in front of it. I urge my colleagues, defeat this amendment. Let's get on with the business of providing this country with affordable energy, and let's get this economy rolling, and let's get back to creating jobs. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. All time has expired. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
On that, I ask a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 112-73. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-73, offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
To House Resolution 245, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This simple amendment requires the President, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense, to certify that moving forward with Lease Sale 220 will not impede naval or other Department of Defense operations off Virginia's coast. The Department of Defense issued a report which stated that 78% of the area of Lease Sale 220 is currently used by the Navy for equipment testing, practicing with live ordnance, underwater training, and other critical operations. There may not be a readily available alternative for live ordnance testing, and of course, we wouldn't want live ordnance being used near oil wells, now would we? As you know, Norfolk is the largest naval base in America. It's critical for our national security and has beneficial side effects, obviously, for the regional economy. But billions of dollars have been invested in Norfolk and in that testbed area. Perhaps it's possible for offshore oil exploration or wind energy development to be compatible with continued naval operations. That's why we ask for a certification. But if energy development forced the Navy to relocate, our national security would suffer, preparedness would suffer, and billions of dollars of extra cost in federal expenditures would be incurred. Virginia's economy, of course, would also suffer, as we could lose more than $10 billion in annual contracting income derived from that base. This amendment ensures that energy development would not cripple naval operations by simply requiring the President, with the Secretary of Defense, to certify that moving forward with Lease Sale 220 won't impede naval operations and harm national security. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition to
The
this
gentleman is
amendment.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. While I appreciate what the gentleman is trying to accomplish, the underlying bill already protects the Defense Department's responsibilities in the Outer Continental Shelf of Virginia, so this amendment is totally unnecessary. Because preserving the working relationship between the Department of Defense and the Department of Interior is of great importance to the Virginia Congressional Delegation and to the Natural Resources Committee, H.R. 1230 already ensures the mutual goals of national security and energy independence by requiring that the lease sale be conducted with stipulations on surface use, as well as additional requirements to make certain that the leases issued in this area would not impact defense operations. I also want to point out that the bipartisan support for energy production offshore of Virginia does exist. According to a study by the Southeast Energy Alliance, offshore energy development in Virginia could create nearly 2,000 jobs in Virginia and produce more than 500 million barrels of oil and 2.5 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, trillion with a T. This natural gas is important because in the last few years, the Dominion Liquefied Natural Gas Terminal in Baltimore, Maryland, received huge amounts of foreign natural gas. Developing energy production in offshore Virginia could displace foreign natural gas, as well as mean more energy for Virginia. Now, in context, 500 million barrels of oil is enough to fuel all 4 million cars in Virginia for more than 4 years, and 2.5 trillion cubic feet of natural gas can heat all 3.2 million Virginia households for more than 11 years. And developing resources off Virginia's coast could generate nearly $19.5 billion in revenues to federal, state, and local governments. Virginians, along with their governor, both Democratic senators, and a majority of the congressional delegation here in Congress, and the City Council of Virginia Beach, off of which much of the development would take place, do support offshore leasing and development because they understand it can bring much-needed jobs and revenues to the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I would inquire how much time is remaining on this
The
side.
gentleman from Virginia has 3.5 minutes, and the gentleman from Colorado has 2.5 minutes remaining.
I thank the chairman, and I thank my friend from Colorado for his remarks. But frankly, if he is so certain of the protections contained in this legislation, then surely this extra special amendment to make sure that Virginia is protected would not find objection on the other side of the aisle. With that, I yield 2 minutes to my friend, Mr. Moran from Northern Virginia.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my good friend and colleague. Mr. Chairman, the U.S. Atlantic Fleet is based at the Norfolk Naval Base and operates in the same waters that this legislation proposes to sell for oil and gas development. Does the Republican majority really want to jeopardize those thousands and thousands of jobs that are identified with that naval base? According to a report issued by the Secretary of Defense, there should be no lease sales in 72% of the proposed lease area that this bill directs be sold to oil and gas companies because it is in conflict with live ordnance, air-surface missile and bomb and gunnery exercises, shipboard qualification trials, carrier qualifications and development and operational and follow-on testing and evaluation, and an additional 5% would interfere with aerial operations and should not host permanent surface structures such as drilling rigs. In other words, more than 3/4 of the area that this legislation directs be sold to oil and gas companies is in conflict with our national security interests. And a good deal of the remaining 22% is within shipping lanes of the country's 2 busiest commercial ports, Hampton Roads and Baltimore. Mr. Chairman, our coastal waters are a shared resource that hosts a number of competing and sometimes incompatible uses. Clearly, direct national security interests should be weighed at least alongside the indirect benefit of unproven oil and gas development that won't occur for many, many, many years to come. This amendment would ensure national security interests would prevail, but it also underscores the point that the majority seems too anxious to dismiss the interests of our coastal fisheries and the tourism industry. Those industries generate billions in income and sustain the livelihood of millions of Americans. Their future is placed at risk when Congress passes laws that disregard the lessons past disasters have taught by mandating shortcuts to more drilling. I urge my colleagues to accept this amendment and reject the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's expired. The gentleman from Colorado.
Is the other side ready to close?
Mr. Chairman, I have one more request to speak.
The gentleman from from Virginia has 1.5 minutes remaining.
I thank the gentleman, and I yield 1 minute to my friend, Mr. Scott from Virginia.
1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the amendment. This amendment will ensure the necessary safeguards are in place to protect military training operations, NASA missions, and port access in certain offshore areas. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, the United States Navy trains extensively in the Virginia Capes Operations Area off the coast of Virginia. Additionally, NASA's Wallops Flight Facility on Virginia's eastern shore requires a clear and unrestricted rocket and target launch range off Virginia's coast. Now, I've had long reservations about drilling off the coast of Virginia. I believe the environmental, economic, and national security risk for that drilling far outweigh any potential benefits. But if drilling will occur, this amendment will ensure that common sense and responsible process will be in place to safeguard against obvious negative consequences to our military, to our NASA, and to port operations. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia.
How much time is remaining on our side, Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from Virginia has 30 seconds remaining, and the gentleman from Colorado has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I just want to say that I appreciate again the reassurances from our colleague from Colorado, but many of us in Virginia want to be sure. Again, this amendment is simple. It does not stop oil production or oil drilling offshore. It simply requires first a certification that the all-important
naval base at Norfolk is protected and that the offshore testing bed offshore is not in jeopardy, given the billions of dollars we've invested in national security in that area and its importance to our regional economy. We think it's a reasonable protection, a reasonable measure. I urge adoption of the amendment. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I would just point out that the governor of Virginia supports this. The majority of the House members from Virginia support this without the amendment. And the Democratic senators from Virginia have in the past offered or agreed to legislation identical in wording to what this legislation says about offshore activity. So because the offshore activities are adequately and responsibly dealt with in the bill as it is, I would urge a no vote on the amendment, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. All time has expired. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, on that basis, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 11273, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 1, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey. Amendment number 2 by Mr. Connolly of Virginia. The chair will reduce to 5 minutes the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 112-73 by the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt, on which further proceedings were postponed, in which the noes prevailed by voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-73, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Wrapping up amendment debate and general debate, with the House taking up the second series of votes for the day. These are amendments to H.R. 1230, supporting leases to oil drilling off the coast of Virginia and in the Gulf of Mexico. Bill supporters believe this legislation will ultimately create jobs and lower gas prices, and opponents think that approval would mean higher taxes, handouts to the oil industry, and damage to the environment. Now, the other measure that you've heard members mention, H.R. 1229, would speed the oil drilling lease approval process. That bill will be debated next week, next Tuesday. So again, we are anticipating 4 votes, beginning with a 15-minute vote on the amendment brought by New Jersey Congressman Rush Holt, requiring new environmental and safety reviews. That'll be followed by an amendment ensuring that oil leases would not harm naval operations off the coast of Virginia. And after that, we expect a procedural vote and then a vote on final passage of H.R. 1230. Votes, by the way, it's expected to go no later than 3 o'clock, and these would be the last votes for the week in the House. So while this vote is underway, we'll get more on these 2 bills. A short time ago, we spoke with a Capitol Hill reporter. Joining us now is Ben Geeman of The Hill. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Thanks for having me on.
Can you tell us what's at the heart of these 2 bills, these oil and gas bills? What are they all about?
Well, these 2 bills reflect very widespread claims by Republicans and to be fair, Democrats from some sort of areas where you have a lot of drilling, that essentially the administration is bottling up and not allowing access to domestic energy production. And so these bills are part of a kind of 3-bill package from the Republicans, and the one that's up on the floor today would essentially set some deadlines for the administration to conduct some offshore lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico, where oil and gas drilling is already allowed, and it would also require the sale of oil and gas leases off the coast of Virginia. Now, that's something that the administration had sort of flirted with, but then in the wake of the BP spill, the administration backed away from plans to allow oil and gas leasing off the coast of some Atlantic states. And so really today you're seeing a lot of kind of cross currents in a big debate that's very much rooted in both high gasoline prices and the high profits that some of the big oil companies, in particular Exxon and Shell, have been reporting. And so what these bills would do would essentially force the administration's hand on allowing greater development. Another bill that's going to be up next week would set some new deadlines for how quickly the administration has to act on drilling permit requests, because you've had widespread complaints from the industry and from Republicans that the drilling permit requests have been slow-walked. Now, the flip side of that is the administration is saying, and Democrats are saying, that what these measures would do would essentially be allowing drilling to go forward as if the BP spill had never happened, and that essentially by creating all these new deadlines that would kind of shortchange some of the environmental reviews that need to be done and some of the safety reviews that need to be done to ensure that drilling proceeds without such, in a way that lessens risks of such a catastrophic spill occurring again.
So now during debate we've heard Republicans say, bottom line, these measures would help reduce gas prices at the pump. How would that happen?
Well, that's a pretty controversial claim, quite frankly. It depends what timeline you're looking at. When you're talking about offshore drilling, you're talking about some pretty big projects and expensive projects and complicated projects, especially as the industry has gone into deeper and deeper waters. So, it's given that even when you start a project, it's going to be quite some time until that exploration or even that development project starts to yield new oil supplies. It's unlikely that there would be any type of immediate effect on gasoline prices. That said, you've heard an argument increasingly advanced from the Republicans that says, look, even though it might be some time before this would bring any type of new supplies onto the market, their view is that by sort of signaling that help is on the way, I suppose, that there is going to be more domestic supply developed, that this would essentially send a signal of sorts to traders that would sort of, in the nearer term, in fact, start to affect prices, not necessarily because there's new supply coming online, but rather because if you sort of look at the market psychology, when traders feel like there's more supplies on the way, in a sense, that would sort of tamp down on some of the fear that unrest in the Middle East and other problems are going to lead to longer-term shortages.
Just a couple of seconds left. Has Energy Secretary Stephen Chu commented on either of these measures? And if so, what's he saying about the proposed changes in policy?
Well, it's actually the Interior Department that controls offshore oil and gas drilling and leasing decisions. And Interior Secretary Ken Salazar has spoken out very strongly about these measures. He told reporters at a press conference a couple weeks ago in advance of the one-year anniversary of the BP disaster, he said, look, these GOP bills reflect what he called an amnesia about the offshore catastrophe last year. He says it's essentially requiring, leasing and production and development to go ahead in a way that, is not sufficiently mindful of the need for greater acknowledgement of safety and so forth, given what happened last year with the Deepwater Horizon rig.
Any comments from oil company executives about the bills?
Well, the industry is very supportive of measures that would allow both wider access, but also have the Interior Department speed up what they say is an overly cumbersome and time-consuming process for drilling permits. What you're hearing the industry saying is, look, we have taken a great number of steps in the wake of the spill to enhance the safety of our projects, and they've launched this new sort of offshore drilling safety institute. But their view is also that, they can go forward in a way that's very mindful of safety, but without taking as much time as the Interior Department has been taking to get these permits out the door.
Ben Geeman of The Hill, we thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
And so again, the House is voting on amendments to H.R. 1230, a vote on an amendment brought by New Jersey Congressman Rush Holt, happening right now. That amendment requiring new environmental and safety reviews. That will be followed by an amendment ensuring that oil leases would not harm naval operations off the coast of Virginia. President Obama is in New York this afternoon to lay a wreath at Ground Zero in New York. And this morning, the president met with firefighters at Engine 54 in Midtown Manhattan. That's the station that lost the greatest number of firefighters on September 11th. Here's part of what the president had to say to firefighters. What happened on Sunday, because of the courage of our military and the outstanding work of our intelligence, sent a message around the world. But it also sent a message back here at home that when we say we will never forget, we mean what we say. That our commitment to making sure that justice is done is something that transcended politics, transcended party. It didn't matter which administration was in. It didn't matter who was in charge. We were going to make sure that the perpetrators of that horrible act, that they received justice. After the ceremony this afternoon, the President will meet with 9/11 family members. It's likely to be emotional moments during that time with the developments over the past few days and the death of Osama bin Laden. We will have live coverage of the President starting at about 1:25 this afternoon on C-SPAN 3. As voting continues on the floor of the House this afternoon, the Senate gavelled in this morning at 10 Eastern. Senators have been offering general speeches throughout most of the day. That'll last until about 5 o'clock this afternoon. Majority Leader Harry Reid is back in the Senate today. His arm is in a sling after yesterday hurting himself during a morning jog. You can see the Senate live right now on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. As voting continues on the floor of the House, President Obama is in New York this afternoon laying a wreath at Ground Zero in New York. After the ceremony, he will be meeting with 9/11 family members. You can see this live right now on our companion network, C-SPAN 3. Also, Vice President Biden will be laying a wreath at the site of the 9/11 attacks at the Pentagon this afternoon. He'll be joined by Defense Secretary Gates, Vice Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General James Cartwright, and at the site also will be family members of 9/11 victims. That is set to begin at 1:30 Eastern.
The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for recorded vote on amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Reports 112-73 by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, in which further proceedings were postponed, in which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-73, offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
The recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
The House is in the last series of votes for the day. Members voting on amendments to H.R. 1230, supporting leases to drill oil off the coast of Virginia and in the Gulf of Mexico. Members right now voting on